Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Seam. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host for the next 28 minutes or so. With me in the studio today is Dr. John Deskins, who's with the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at West Virginia University. Dr. Deskins has been around our state in that capacity here for the past 5 years, doing a number of economic analyses for both our state policymakers and for some of the key industries here within the Mountain State. And he just concluded a study that he did in conjunction with the West Virginia Coal Forum concerning the current economic impact of the coal industry. And I'm just absolutely astonished to observe the impact of today's industry, given the downturn that everybody's aware of, and all the layoffs and all the austerity that's taken place within the coal industry over the past decade or so. Dr. Deskins, thanks so much for taking time from your busy schedule to join us here today, and thanks so much for the work that you've done.
Sure. Well, no problem at all. Glad to be back. I've been on your show a few times before, and I'm always happy to come down and visit. And this was a great report, and I was happy to work on it as well.
Yeah, very eye-opening.
Certainly.
The impact of the industry, even in its current profile. I mean, everybody's aware, as I indicated at the outset, that we've lost a lot of our production, lost a lot of our coal jobs to a variety of factors over the past, and we used to get into those factors as we were experiencing the downturn, a lot of bankruptcies. And it's interesting, being around the Capitol, there's a lot of people that think that the industry is sort of being phased out or is not very important as it once was.
Absolutely. The focus has been on coal's decline or coal's demise, and it is true that production is down substantially from where it was at a recent high in 2008. So given that context, we thought it was important to just step back and look at coal today, or for 2017, and what does that industry really mean to West Virginia nowadays after the decline? The fact of the matter is, the numbers are really clear. Coal is still a really important part of our state's economy, despite the production declines that we've seen in recent years. There's absolutely no doubt that coal still plays an important role in West Virginia.
I remember saying a couple years ago, as we were going through, some of the worst times, some of the darkest days in coal, where we were seeing mine after mine close. I remember saying that that long-term forecast had us plateauing, hitting bottom fairly soon, and maintaining about 100 million tons per year going forward. And while you're going through the time when you're losing production and workers are being furloughed, it's hard to experience anything but just sort of defeat and all. But I remember saying today's, if you're one of the miners laid off, especially, or if you're near a mine that's closed, you're really negative, and your glass is less than half full. But the day's going to reappear with that glass being half full as opposed to half empty.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, production fell from 2008 through 2016, and that's the time period that you're thinking about when we saw so much of a decline in production and so much pessimism. But coal did hit bottom at the end of 2016. And 2017 was a much better year. Production bounced back up by a pretty important margin in 2017. Overall production was between 90 and 95 million tons in 2017. And I think now's a good time for us to kind of regroup now that coal has stabilized, and now that we expect stable production for the next few years. Let's regroup and just look at the numbers and figure out what this industry really does mean to the economy now that we've come down to a new stable point.
I think that captures kind of where we are, and again, there's reason to be optimistic. And if things stay where they are, following this modest rebound the past 18 months, West Virginia coal and the coal industry is still a major part of, it's a major driver behind our state's economy. It's a major part of our state's industrial portfolio.
Well,
and it's just going to remain very, very important.
Well, when I read out these numbers to say specifically how important coal is for West Virginia's economy, it is major. They're really impressive numbers just to get your head around how much this industry still means for West Virginia and will continue to mean for the foreseeable future.
Well, the floor is yours, so why don't we go right into those numbers?
Okay.
And we also got a few slides we can show here in a few moments.
Well, sure. Well, I mean, should I start with exports, or where do you want me to start?
Well, wherever you're comfortable starting, and then then we're just going to chat about.
Well, first off, let's
those.
start with the production
Okay.
forecast. Again, production has fallen substantially since 2008 through 2016. It bounced back in 2017, and overall,
From about 160 million tons.
yeah, we were at 158 million tons in 2008. If I remember that correctly, we fell down to the low 80s in 2016, and then we bounced back to the low 90s in 2017. And 2018, the year's only halfway finished, but we expect production to be relatively stable around
Appears
that.
about the same as what it was last year.
Yeah, and we expect that will continue to be the case for the next few years, at least for the next 4 or 5 years. Just look at the long run forecast. In our report, we have a graphic that shows not our forecast, but the forecast from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA. They're a unit within the Department of Energy. They're showing the national forecast for coal production, and they basically think that coal production has leveled out nationally, and it's going to stay roughly where it is now for the long term, for the next 2 or 3 decades. They break down production into electric power use, coal that goes for electric power use, and coal that goes for exports. We think that coal going to electric power use will diminish a little bit, but coal going to exports will increase. So overall, production will be about the same. So that's the baseline.
Okay.
One important part to remember is exports. Exports are so important to an economy because we have 2 different types of businesses fundamentally. The first type is a business that sells stuff out of the state or out of the country even, and brings money into the region. Export-oriented industries that bring money in. And then we have businesses that pop up in response to local demand. Your restaurants and your movie theaters and your gas stations, those that respond naturally to local demand. The former type of business is what is so important to cultivate in the first place, to bring money in. And then once you bring money in, those other businesses will pop up naturally when you have people that are living there and spending money in the economy. So my point is not to go into that in depth. My point is to say exports are very important, and I'm going to give you a few statistics that just indicate how important coal is to West Virginia exports.
Okay.
First and foremost, as far as everything we export in West Virginia goes, coal makes up 40-some% of that. For 2017,
Wow.
The number varies. The number has been even more than 40-some%. The number's been up to even half at some point in the past. But for 2017, and we expect this to be relatively stable, coal makes up 40-some% of all the stuff that we export from West Virginia overseas. It's very important. Furthermore, West Virginia is the biggest coal exporter in the nation. Wyoming is the biggest coal producer. We're the second biggest coal producer, but in terms of exports, we're the biggest exporter. And West Virginia makes up 30-some% of all the coal that we export from the nation. That's a big deal, right?
Oh, that's real big.
The fact
That's
that we're the biggest.
I guess
coal
a lot of that has to do with, we have a strong metallurgical or met coal portfolio, which is desired all over the world.
Absolutely.
It's for steel making.
Absolutely.
And I would also add that our close proximity to 4 or 5 major ports, Virginia, Baltimore, New Orleans, we're right here.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Those are the 2 reasons why we surpassed Wyoming. For Wyoming's they're not as close to export terminals, and they're producing more thermal coal and less met coal.
Right.
And we're in the completely opposite
We have
situation.
a real
So
niche there.
Yeah, we're much better poised for exports. And I just will say that, that gives us more strength in the long run because for Wyoming coal, the declines that we expect nationally are coming from thermal coal that's used in electric power generation. But metallurgical coal, like what we export, that's used in steel production, that's not going anywhere, right? There is no alternative method for steel production. Coal is going to be with us for steel production for a long, long time. So that's a much more stable part of kind of our coal portfolio. Most people don't think a whole lot about that because a lot of the discussion nationally is about electric power generation.
Right.
But where we're focusing a lot on met coal, it gives us a lot more stability. But then, another interesting part is there's a graphic here as well. Your folks here may show it. If you look at all the countries that export coal in the world, the U.S. is the 4th largest coal exporter. As I said already, West Virginia makes up 30-some% of U.S. coal exports.
I think we have that slide here. And,
but it's interesting to note, if West Virginia were a country by ourselves, we would be the world's 9th largest coal exporter just by ourselves. So again, just more numbers to give you context about how important coal is in the state.
More numbers, but that puts a dose of reality into our export market as well. I mean, we have been exporting and playing in a global economy for a long time, as long as we've been mining coal. There's been a lot of people just began, competing globally with their goods or commodity, since the computer age. But the coal industry has been shipping coal around the world for a long time, and I think that the slide that we have here shows how competitive those global markets are. We have the country of Australia that I think is the leading coal exporter. That exports 2.5, 3 times more than what we export from the United States to those same destinations that we're competing for.
Right. It is a very competitive market, and there's a lot of risk, upside and downside risk associated with exports because there are so many different factors affecting the global economy. But that's where the growth potential is because China is still using a lot of coal. India is still using a lot of coal, and their coal use is growing. And
Europe's using all throughout the European community.
Yeah, the biggest destination for West Virginia exports actually is Europe. We also export a lot to India. We export some to South America as well. So there's upside potential with their export base. Well, let me give you some of the numbers here, though, when we think about the impact of coal. So the main part of the report that we did was not to lay out the trends that have happened in recent years. The main point was just to look at what coal means to the West Virginia economy. So first, let me just think about coal mining specifically. So first and foremost, just for 2017, coal sales from West Virginia mines amounted to about $6.5 billion. About $6.5 billion worth of coal was sold in West Virginia in 2017.
Wow.
An incredible number.
That's a big number.
And so the coal mines, they're spending this money to pay their workers. They're spending this money on supplies. They're having to hire contractors to do survey work. They're having to hire a whole host of suppliers to provide them with the machinery and equipment and the utilities and all the pieces that go into coal mining. And when they purchase inputs, that helps other businesses in the state, right? So other businesses are helped other than just coal mines directly. And when their workers receive money, and when they receive their paycheck, they're spending that money in the local economy, at the movie theater, the gas station, or the restaurant, and that's another way where coal mining helps other industries. We're talking about indirect and induced impacts here that come from the coal mine expenditures directly. So what we did was we look at that $6.5 billion in coal sales. We look at all the jobs and all the employee compensation that goes along with that, and then we use what we refer to as an input-output model or an economic multiplier model to relate that to the overall economic impact as that money recirculates through the economy. So our headline number is coal mining supports over $9 billion worth of economic activity in West Virginia.
Wow.
With the direct coal mining activity and with the indirect and induced impacts as that money is respent through the economy, over $9 billion in economic
And
activity.
that includes, what, 13,000 direct jobs?
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Coal mines, and so to go on
Getting ahead
from
of you a little
economic
bit, I'm
activity to employment, the coal mines, even after we've seen employment declines, coal mines still employ 13,000 and some workers. Lots of people still work for the coal mines, and coal mining is the highest paid sector in the West Virginia economy. Matter of fact, the average coal miner earns about twice what the average worker in West Virginia earns.
Wow.
So, when the coal miner receives that income, when he's spending it in the economy, to buy a car, to buy a house, to buy whatever, it's a pretty large economic impact that he's creating because his income's so high in the first place. So we have 13,000 and some coal miners working in the mines. Their direct compensation
Making twice what the average West Virginian.
making twice what the average West Virginian earns. Their compensation overall is over $1 billion worth of income just in their wages. And to apply that multiplier model, coal mines altogether are supporting nearly 30,000 jobs in the West Virginia economy. And they're supporting nearly $2 billion worth of employee compensation. Furthermore, coal mining is generating, right, with all this activity and all these spillover and multiplier effects, coal mining is generating more than $500 million in state and local tax revenue. Huge economic impact. If coal mining, completely hypothetical, but if coal mining were just to disappear today, the impact on West Virginia's economy would be unimaginable. That's how big the industry still is, with over $9 billion supported in economic activity, nearly 30,000 jobs supported, and over $500 million in state tax revenue.
Wow. I was really surprised to see Mark Muco put together before one of the legislative committees a review of severance taxes over the past couple of years. And it's just remarkable that coal still provides the greatest percentage of severance taxes in the state.
It's still very important. Anyway,
several $100 million.
But our report doesn't end there, actually.
Right.
The numbers that I just reported relate to coal mining specifically. But it's also important to remember that a lot of the coal that we produce stays in West Virginia to produce electricity, right? I mean, we have a lot of coal-fired electric power generation in West Virginia, and there's a lot of spending and a lot of jobs in that part of the economy as well. If you also consider coal-fired power generation, coal in the West Virginia economy supports nearly $13 billion in economic activity. Just to remind you, our total state GDP is about $77 billion.
Wow.
So nearly $13 billion in economic activity supported by coal mining and coal-fired electric power generation when the total economy is $77 billion. That's a huge impact. Furthermore, the jobs number comes to about 39,000 when you incorporate coal-fired power generation as well. 39,000 jobs supported in the state, $2.5 billion in employee compensation, and now about $650 million in state and local tax revenue when we also incorporate coal-fired power generation. Enormous impact still, after the decline and bounce back that we've seen.
I mean, those numbers are staggering. That's close to, I just did some rough math. I mean, that's like 17–18% of total GDP comes from coal.
Yeah, it's big.
I mean, that's...
And one thing to keep in mind is, the topic of industrial diversification. I talk about industrial diversification myself a lot, the need that we have to diversify our economy. But it's important to remember that diversification doesn't mean take coal away and replace it with one other industry. That's not diversification at all. That would not be good.
No.
Diversification means that we just need other parts of the economy to grow as well. Has nothing to do with coal going away. Matter of fact, we need coal to stay and need coal to be healthy, and we need other parts of our energy economy to be healthy, and we need other sectors to grow. But nobody should ever interpret a call for industrial diversification to mean in any way that coal should go away, because that's not what it means. Coal is still
it does mean that from some voices.
Well,
we no need to get into that, but you really got when you hear we need to diversify our economy, people need to listen closely to what really is being said, because there are some voices that truly mean to move away from our fossil fuel industries when they use that term diversification.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm probably too naive. What I mean is when I say diversification,
Right. Oh,
I
I
just
agree.
mean we want a bunch of industries.
And we all
to
say
grow.
that. And we all mean that. And we all, truly invite, expansion of all these industries and new businesses and new business opportunities. I don't think there's any question about that.
Sure, but when I say it, I want energy to be healthy. I want other sectors to be healthy. I definitely don't want energy to disappear, not by any means, because it is so important for the economy, and it is expected to continue to be important for a long time.
Should be front center of a lot of things we do, and it's kind of interesting. We've had great support from our current legislative houses, both the Senate and House. They've been working very close. The governor's office is 100% supportive of growing our energy assets here within the state, and they've been very helpful. And I think I think this report just underscores the need for our government officials to even take a greater role and interest in our energy assets and do what they possibly can, to try to cultivate a growth, expansive environment for those assets.
Well, this report certainly shows what an important foundation it provides for our economy. And without coal, we would be in trouble because of all the jobs it creates, because of all the economic activities that it supports, and all the tax revenue that it supports.
Well, as you well know, most of the losses that we've experienced here in the past, again, 9 years, occurred predominantly in occurred exclusively in southern West Virginia. And we had 5 or 6 counties, just south of us here that had unemployment levels equal to what they were during the Great Depression.
That's an important point. When people kind of nationally think about the losses in coal, I imagine that they picture the losses in coal being spread across their entire coal-producing region, but it's not true at all. The coal mining jobs that were lost were very heavily concentrated in the Central Appalachian Coal Basin, in southern West Virginia and in eastern Kentucky. And it gets to the point that we're not just talking about the suffering associated with individual miners and their families. That's enough as it is. But we also get to the point where we're talking about community sustainability. Because the losses are so heavily concentrated in areas that were very dependent on coal, the question arises, are these communities even sustainable? Or some of these communities even sustainable after the losses that we've seen? So it's it's a really desperate situation in some situations.
Yeah, it really is.
In some places.
We've seen Boone County, for example. I mean, that's sort of the heart and soul of the southern coal field and southern coal fields here. And at one point in time, not too long ago, accounted for about 20% of all states' production.
Yeah.
They produce 30 million tons of coal.
For many years, they were a top coal-producing county.
And today, I think they're about 20% of that, maybe 25% of that. 9 million tons.
Sure.
It's just devastating.
What happened there was the Central Appalachian coal is better coal. It's cleaner burning coal, lower sulfur content, for example, and it's hotter burning coal. And because it's better coal, it's been mined more aggressively than Northern Appalachian coal or Illinois coal or Wyoming coal. And so there's a lot of coal that's left in Central Appalachia for sure, but because we mine it so aggressively, the coal tends to be deeper in the ground than what we see in Northern Appalachia or Illinois or Wyoming. So it's just more expensive to get out of the ground. So production there fell before it fell in other parts of the country.
Some would argue fiscal policy and taxation and all that plays a role on the overall non-competitive nature of some of that coal. I mean, it was just competitive a couple of years ago, and today it's being squeezed out. A big factor, one of the biggest, I believe, is the decreased percentage or availability of markets. We have actually experienced a nationwide, and some of this is due to all the shale gas that's being used for electricity generation today. But there's a number of those factors that came together, kind of converged at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I talk about myself all the time. I mean, we definitely had a drop in demand nationally that was driven by natural gas, that was driven by the regulatory policy, and we had a few years of weak exports there. But I'm just saying, when the drop in demand occurred, it manifested itself in Central Appalachia the most.
It did.
Because of those geologic conditions.
Yes.
But it definitely all stemmed from the national drop in demand from gas and regulation.
10 years ago, we were consuming as a country over 1 billion tons of annual coal production, consuming over 1 billion. I think we were consuming close to 1.2 billion. Today it's about 700 million. So the overall electric generation percentage has decreased, particularly coal-fired.
Sure. And another way to present that is, a few years ago, coal made up just over 50% of electric power generation, and now it's fallen down to the low 30% range. So same idea, just presented a different way.
And power consumption has also dropped nationally.
Well, that's because refrigerators and air conditioners and televisions are so much more energy efficient now than they used to be. So electricity demand is falling.
A lot of factors.
Yeah.
A lot of factors.
Very complicated. Yes.
When I'm talking about coal and our industry and production, I often, refer to our state's output in thirds, where we consume about a third. Now, these numbers vary and aren't exact, but we consume about a third of the coal that we produce right here within the state through the 11, 12 electric generators that we have that are coal-fired. We export about a third of our state's production, and these are roughly 30, 33 million tons of, of coal baskets or volumes. And then the third is the coal that we ship around the country, to some 20-some states east of the Mississippi River. So we consume a third, we send a third to 20-some states, and then we export a third.
Yeah, that's about right. I hadn't thought of it in those terms really, but that is right. And if the viewer wants more information on that, we have a lot of figures in the report that lay out where our coal goes specifically in terms of industry, exports, or power generation, and then we also say the specific states that we ship coal to and how that's changed, over time. So a lot of that information.
It's amazing
is in the
how
report.
world events, given our position in this, our standing in global export markets. It's interesting to when you sit back and view that, how world politics and how world weather, climatic weather events, impact all of that.
Well, that's true, and that's why the export
tsunami in
markets are so.
Japan that destroyed some of the nuclear fleets caused Japan to go to coal-fired generation.
That was a big deal.
There were big rains and monsoons and typhoons in Australia, and they couldn't export as much coal as they typically do. So we were able to fill some of that void.
That is absolutely true. It is amazing how interconnected the world is, because you're absolutely right. Flooding in Australia that closes down their mines can have a big impact in West Virginia on our coal exports. That's happened a couple times in the last decade or so. So the global economy is very interconnected, and as I think about trade and trade policy and things like that, I hope people realize how important exports are, to West Virginia and how we want to grow exports. So I hope we don't have any policies that arise that puts that in jeopardy. Who knows what's going to happen, because a lot's going on. But one thing that's for sure is that exports are very important to our state, very important to coal, and we hope that nothing jeopardizes that.
Well, I tell you, that's an excellent place to probably stop here. We're just about out of time, and I want to thank you for the excellent work that you and your staff have done since your arrival at West Virginia University.
Thank you.
You've done excellent work, and I know we've had a good partnership, and you've done a lot of things for coal, and thanks so much for this recent study and for coming by today.
Well, thanks so much. Call me anytime. I'm always happy to come visit with you.
Appreciate that, and thank you for tuning into today's Coal Seam, and the Library Television Network is celebrating their 40th year this year.